EVO. There are moments in history when everything has already been decided, but no one has said it out loud yet. Just after midnight on July 17, 1918, in a quiet house, the Romanov family was asleep. Not peacefully. Sleep had become thin and conditional, but sleep nonetheless. The guards were nervous. The city was restless. White army forces were close enough now that artillery could be imagined even when none was heard. Inside the Ipatiev House, orders were being rehearsed rather than written. No one knocked on the door with hatred. No one shouted slogans. There were no speeches about history or justice. Instead, there was procedure. A decision had already been made elsewhere, carried out by men who understood that hesitation was more dangerous than violence. This is how political murder often happens. Not with fury, but with efficiency. Welcome back to the Ides of April. This is the end of the Romanovs. In our last episode, we traced how Nicholas II lost his empire long before he lost his life, how abdication stripped him of power but not of meaning, and why that lingering symbolism made survival impossible in a revolutionary state. Tonight, we move into those final hours. Not ideology, not politics, but the moment when history becomes physical. This is Chapter 4, The Basement. Shortly after 1 a.m., the Romanov family was awakened and told to dress quickly. They were informed, calmly, bureaucratically, that fighting had reached the city and that they were being moved for their own safety. It was a lie so routine that it barely registered. Nicholas carried his son Alexei down the stairs. The boy was weak, ill, unable to walk without assistance. Alexandra followed, then the 4 daughters, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia, still wearing corsets beneath their dresses, still carrying the habits of a life that no longer existed. They were led into a small basement room. Chairs were brought in. The family was arranged along the wall. Guards crowded the doorway, and Nicholas asked a single question. What's happening? The answer came in the form of a statement read quickly, awkwardly, as if the words themselves were already obsolete. The former czar had been condemned. The decision was final, and then the shooting began. It wasn't clean. It wasn't immediate. It was chaos. The first volley killed Nicholas almost instantly. Alexandra and several of the children fell. Smoke filled the room. Gunfire ricocheted. The executioners had expected compliance from physics, not resistance. But the bullets didn't behave as planned. Several of the daughters survived the initial shots. Jewels, diamonds and gemstones sewn into their corsets and undergarments, acted as a crude form of armor, deflecting bullets, absorbing impact. Panic followed. The shooters reloaded, and bayonets were drawn. And what followed was not execution. It became improvisation. Close-range shots, stabbing, shouting. The room became unrecognizable as a historical space and reverted instead to something older and more primitive. Fear colliding with inevitability. It took nearly 20 minutes to finish. And when it was over, 11 people lay dead. Not symbols, not rulers, bodies. Their remains were loaded into trucks and driven into the forest. Acid was poured over them, fires were set, graves were dug and redrawn. The earth was asked desperately to help them forget. But history doesn't forget simply because it's told to. Yes, the Romanovs were gone, and what remained was silence, confusion, and a question that wouldn't stay buried. Did everyone really die that night? Chapter 5. What their deaths changed. Revolutions are often judged by how they begin. They should be judged by what they make possible. When the Romanovs were killed in the basement of the Ipatiev House, there was no public announcement. There was no immediate international outcry, no dramatic acknowledgement that a dynasty stretching back more than 3 centuries had been erased in the dark. For days, even weeks, information moved slowly and unevenly, distorted by distance, by censorship, and by disbelief. But the impact of that night was immediate, even if no one said it out loud. The execution of Nicholas II and his family didn't end the Russian Civil War. It didn't stabilize the country. It didn't magically legitimize the Bolshevik regime. What it did was far more final. It closed a door that could never be opened again. Before July 1918, restoration, however unlikely, remained theoretical. Monarchist forces, White Army commanders, and foreign governments could still imagine scenarios in which Nicholas or his children might be installed as figureheads or bargaining chips, maybe rallying symbols. History has a long tradition of resurrecting defeated rulers when chaos demands familiarity. After July 1918, that tradition ended. There would be no Romanov restoration, no counter-revolution crowned in exile, no negotiated settlement built around continuity. The Bolsheviks had crossed the line from revolution to permanence. They had made the future irreversible. This is the point where revolutions stop pretending to be corrective and begin revealing what they truly are: replacement systems that can't tolerate ambiguity. Killing Nicholas wasn't enough. Killing the family ensured that no alternative narrative could survive him. And that clarity came at a cost. Internationally, the execution hardened perceptions of the Bolshevik regime. What had been viewed by some as a radical but transitional government now appeared brutal, uncompromising, and unconcerned with moral optics. Monarchies across Europe quietly took note. So did emerging republics. The message was unmistakable. This was not a movement interested in reform or reconciliation. It was interested in eradication. Domestically, the impact was more complicated. The deaths didn't inspire mass celebration, nor did they immediately provoke widespread horror. Instead, they produced something more destabilizing: unease. Even among those who despised the Tsar, the execution of children, regardless of political justification, introduced a moral rupture that couldn't be easily explained away. The revolution had secured itself, but it had also revealed its willingness to do whatever that security required. And from that moment forward, fear became governance. The Romanovs' death set a precedent. If the former emperor and his children could be eliminated without trial, without announcement, without accountability, then no one was untouchable. The revolution no longer needed justification. It only needed necessity. This would become a defining feature of the Soviet state. And yet, even as the Bolsheviks believed they had erased the past, that past refused to behave. Because while the execution closed political possibilities, it opened something else entirely: a vacuum of certainty. The bodies were hidden, the details were obscured, early reports were inconsistent. Some claimed only Nicholas had been killed. Others suggested the family had been moved. Rumors spread, not because people wanted to undermine the revolution, but because absence invites imagination, and imagination is dangerous in the aftermath of atrocity. Into that uncertainty stepped a question that wouldn't stay quiet. Man, what if one of them survived? And this is where history begins to fracture, not along ideological lines, but emotional ones. The idea that one child, particularly the youngest daughter, Anastasia, might have escaped, did more than comfort monarchists. It gave meaning to loss. It suggested that brutality had limits, that chaos had failed to fully consume innocence, that history, at its most violent, had still left room for some mercy. In a century defined by industrialized death, this mattered. The Bolsheviks underestimated that impulse. They assumed political closure would produce psychological closure. Instead, it produced obsession. The Romanovs, now dead, became something far more potent than they had ever been alive. A myth. And myths don't obey ideology. What followed over the next decades was not a single lie, but a constellation of lies. Women appeared across Europe claiming to be Anastasia. Some were dismissed immediately, but others persisted, armed with personal details that were difficult to explain away. Lawsuits were filed, journalists investigated, aristocrats argued. The story metastasized across borders, across decades, across generations. The execution had removed a dynasty, but it also had created a narrative problem the Bolsheviks couldn't control. And this matters because it reveals something fundamental about political violence. Killing a symbol doesn't guarantee its disappearance. Sometimes it ensures the exact opposite. For most of the 20th century, the question of Anastasia's survival remained unresolved, not because evidence was lacking, but because certainty was inconvenient. Governments changed, archives closed, science lagged, the Cold War hardened silos. The Romanovs existed in a strange liminal space, dead in official accounts, but alive in popular imagination. It would take nearly 80 years in the emergence of modern DNA analysis to finally end the debate. When remains were finally recovered, examined, and tested against living relatives, the conclusion was unambiguous. All 5 children had died in 1918. Anastasia hadn't escaped. No miracle had occurred in that basement. History hadn't blinked. But by the time science closed the case, the myth had already done its work. It had kept the Romanovs present in global consciousness long after their political relevance should have faded. It had softened the brutality of their deaths into something survivable, narratively, if not morally. And that, too, is a consequence of assassination. The killing of the Romanovs did not simply reshape Russia. It reshaped how the world understood power and legitimacy and the cost of revolution. It demonstrated that modern political movements are willing to eliminate not just opponents, but possibilities. And that once they do, the damage reverberates far beyond the moment of violence. The basement ended a dynasty. The aftermath ensured it would never fully disappear.
Our dogs are family, and they deserve food that treats them that way. That's why Ollie makes meals with fresh, human-grade ingredients you can actually recognize. Chicken, beef, carrots, blueberries, spinach, no fillers, no byproducts, just real nutrition slow-cooked to keep your pup healthy and energized. Shinier coats, better digestion, more energy, and with 5 protein-packed flavors like beef with sweet potatoes or turkey with blueberries, your dog may be eating better than you. Every plan is customized to your dog's age, breed, and activity level, and delivered right to your door in perfectly portioned, easy-to-serve packs. Simple, fresh, and made just for them. Now here's how you can try it. Your dog's well-being starts with their food, and that's why Ollie delivers fresh, human-grade food that your dog will love. Head to ollie.com/IDES. Tell them all about your dog and use code IDES to get 60% off your welcome kit when you subscribe today. Plus, they offer a happiness guarantee on the first box, so if you're not completely satisfied, you'll get your money back. That's OLLIE.com/IDES and enter code IDES to get 60% off your first box. Most people can't name every financial account they have or what any of them are really worth. A 401k here, an old brokerage there, a few credit cards, maybe a forgotten savings account. It's a kind of financial fog, and it's costing people money. Monarch cuts through that fog. It's an all-in-one personal finance platform that brings your entire financial life together, cleanly, clearly, and instantly on your laptop or your phone. Link your accounts in minutes. See where your money's actually going and take control of it. Monarch does the heavy lifting. Smart categorization, powerful visuals, and planning tools trusted by professionals. It's been named Best Budgeting App of 2025 by The Wall Street Journal, Forbes' Best App for Couples, and listed among CNBC's top fintech companies in the world. Don't let financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use code IDES at monarch.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarch.com with code IDES.
Chapter 6. Anastasia and the Refusal to Accept the End. History is often cruel, but uncertainty is worse. In the months following the execution of the Romanovs, information moved slowly, imperfectly, and selectively. The Bolsheviks offered contradictory accounts of what had happened that night. At times they implied that only Nicholas was dead, at others that the family had been moved. The locations of the bodies were concealed, the details deliberately blurred. And this wasn't incompetence, it was strategy. But it had consequences the revolution didn't anticipate. Because when certainty is withheld, people will supply their own. And, as discussed, into that vacuum stepped the idea that one of the Romanov children, specifically Anastasia Romanov, the youngest daughter, had survived. Not rescued by loyalists, not smuggled out by foreign agents, but spared, or missed, or lost in the chaos. It was, on its face, improbable, but it was also irresistible. Anastasia became the focus not because evidence supported her survival, but because meaning did. She was young, she was spirited, she was easy to imagine running, easy to imagine slipping through history's fingers at the last second. In a century already defined by slaughter, the idea that one child might have escaped offered something dangerously rare: emotional relief. The first claimants appeared within a few years of the execution. Some were laughably dismissed, but still others lingered, and one in particular would dominate the narrative for decades, a woman known as Anna Anderson. Anderson surfaced in Germany in the early 1920s after a suicide attempt. She claimed to be Anastasia. She bore scars. She possessed fragments of personal knowledge that were difficult, though not impossible, to explain. She attracted supporters among Romanov relatives and European aristocracy. She also attracted skeptics, investigators, and doctors who questioned her mental health. And what followed was not some simple hoax, but a prolonged cultural obsession. Court cases dragged on for years. Journalists chased leads across continents. Each inconsistency was met with a counterargument. Each contradiction softened by the absence of definitive proof. The lack of bodies became the story. The silence of the grave became testimony. And this mattered because the Anastasia myth was never really about Anastasia. It was about resistance to finality. The Romanovs had not just been killed. They had been erased without ceremony, without public reckoning, without the ritual closure that societies rely on to process catastrophe. No funeral, no grave, no collective acknowledgement. Just disappearance. Anastasia's survival offered a way to reopen the story, to rewrite the ending without confronting the full brutality of the truth. And so, the myth endured. For much of the 20th century, science could not decisively intervene. Forensic techniques were limited. Political access to Soviet archives was virtually non-existent. The Cold War completely froze cooperation. The Romanovs remained suspended between history and folklore. And it wasn't until the 1990s, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, that the Earth finally revealed its secrets. Mass graves near Yekaterinburg were discovered. Remains were exhumed. DNA analysis, new, precise, and unforgiving, was conducted. Comparisons were made to living relatives, and the results finally were conclusive. Yes, everyone had died. No escape for Anastasia, no escape for any of them. Anna Anderson was identified as a Polish factory worker named Franziska Szanowska. The mystery collapsed under scientific scrutiny. Not with drama, but with quiet inevitability. History hadn't spared a child. It had only delayed acknowledgement. What's striking is how little this revelation changed emotionally. The myth didn't vanish overnight. It still lingered in books and films and conversations, because myths don't actually require accuracy to survive. They just require a need. And we needed Anastasia. We needed proof that even in the most ruthless political violence, something innocent had slipped through. That the revolution had failed just once to complete its work. But it hadn't. The Romanovs died in that basement in 1918. Not symbolically or partially, but completely. And that truth, unsoftened, unredeemed, is the final legacy of their assassination. The murder of Nicholas II and his family wasn't a mistake, wasn't excess or an act of uncontrolled rage. It was a decision, cold, deliberate, and rooted in the logic of revolution. They were killed not because they ruled, but because they represented. And that distinction matters, because once a political movement decides that symbols must die to secure the future, there is no natural stopping point. The Romanovs weren't the last to learn this. They were simply among the earliest. The basement ended a dynasty. The myth tried to undo it. Science closed the argument. What remains is the uncomfortable truth that history doesn't owe us survivors. It doesn't soften itself for our benefit, and it doesn't always leave room for hope. Sometimes it just closes the door and walks away. If you're enjoying the show, make sure you're following the Ides of April and the entire EVO Creative lineup, wherever you get your podcasts. The Devil Within, Criminal Mischief, Taboo Treasures, and a new show, Finding Me with Josh Wolf. Follow all of them so you never miss a new episode. And rate and review, because ratings and reviews genuinely help independent shows like ours grow. If you have a moment, leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you're listening right now. It helps more than you think. And yes, we read all of them. And you can now watch full episodes, clips, and exclusives from all EVO Creative shows on our YouTube channel. Subscribe to EVO Creative on YouTube and turn on notifications so you don't miss new drops across our network. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok for updates, visuals, and behind-the-scenes content at The Devil Within Pod, at Ides of April Pod, and at EVO Creative. And at Finding Me with Josh Wolf. Visit the network, explore all of our shows, projects, and upcoming releases at evocreative.com. If you have a story, a tip, a correction, a complaint, or something you think we should cover, please email me at info@evocreative.com. And if you know someone who loves true crime, history, horror, or comedy, or stories that just refuse to let go, share the episode. Word of mouth keeps the network alive. And don't forget to check the show notes for great deals from the amazing sponsors that still support long-form storytelling. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe out there. The Ides of April is an EVO production recorded live at Bel Air Studios in Los Angeles, California. For the Ides of April, I'm your writer and host, Brandon Morgan.